They thought I wouldn't notice when they labeled me Project 98, a liability to be removed, quietly. But I heard everything, every plan, every price tag they put on the house I built with my own hands. So, I sold it, without a word. And that was only the beginning. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. The invitation came on a Friday afternoon, tucked between a Medicare flyer and the gas bill. The envelope bore Travis's handwriting, sharp, slanted, like he was always racing through life. It wasn't his birthday. It wasn't Thanksgiving. Just a note. Dinner tonight at our place, 6 p.m. Delaney's making her chicken marsala. Something about it felt rehearsed. It wasn't unusual for them to invite me over, but there was a tone, even in that brief note, that made the space between my ribs tighten. Still, I shaved, changed into my one good button-down, and showed up on time. You don't raise a son for 3 decades and ignore him just because the timing feels off. Their house sat on a tree-lined street that used to be quieter when we first moved to Missoula. I built my place on the edge of the old trail system back when land was affordable. Travis chose a newer development, all manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. I rang the bell. Delaney opened the door with a smile too wide to be warm. "Lowell." "Come in, come in," she sang, stepping aside. The house smelled like rosemary and something caramelizing too fast. Travis stood in the kitchen, uncorking wine like a man preparing a closing argument. "Dad?" He nodded, barely glancing up. Micah bounded out of the living room to hug me. "Grandpa." His arms wrapped around my waist, familiar and anchoring. But just as quickly, Delaney redirected him. "Why don't you show Grandpa your drawing after dinner?" "Sweetie?" Micah's shoulders fell, but he obeyed. He always did. Just like his father at that age, dinner was plated before I could hang my coat. The table was set with cloth napkins and silverware polished to a shine. A candle flickered between us. This wasn't a meal, it was a stage. "So, Dad," Travis started once we'd all taken our first bites. "Delaney and I have been thinking lately. You've lived alone since Mom passed, and we were wondering if maybe it's time to get a little more support, just in case." I chewed slowly, watching his eyes shift toward Delaney. She offered a sympathetic tilt of her head. "We just want what's best for you, Lowell." He reached beneath the table and produced a folder. "We've done the research. There's a place called Silver Oaks. Great reputation. They've even got woodworking classes." Delaney slid a form across the table. My name stared back at me in bold print. Lowell Vexler. My birth date was correct. There was a blank where my signature should be. "They said we could reserve a spot if we move quickly," Travis added, voice too smooth. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. I didn't say a word. My hands itched to clench, but I kept them on the table, relaxed, as though we were still just 3 people sharing a meal. Delaney poured more wine. "You'd have your own space, and friends your age. Think about it." "I will," I said. But even then, I knew I wouldn't. Not the way they expected. That night, back home, the quiet was sharper than usual. I stood in the kitchen, Ellen's favorite mug still on the shelf, untouched for years. I made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the empty driveway. The next morning, my voicemail blinked. I pressed play. "Hello, Mr. Vexler. This is Linda from Silver Oaks. We're excited to welcome you next Thursday. Your son finalized the paperwork. Let us know if you have any dietary restrictions." I played it again, and again. They'd made the decision, not me. I didn't call Travis. I didn't mention the voicemail. I simply deleted it. Then I stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, watching leaves spiral down the lawn. I mowed myself just last week. Something had shifted, not in anger, not yet, but in weight. Not everything breaks with a bang. Some things erode, slowly, like stone, losing to wind. The drawer let out a soft creak. Too familiar. too casual, as if it hadn't just tried to swallow part of my future whole the night before. I told myself I was only tidying up. The kitchen was clean, the porch swept. That drawer had become the last thing out of place in a house I'd built with my own hands. Inside, where I normally kept spare pens and old tax forms, something new caught my eye. A navy blue folder, thinner than the rest, unlabeled at first glance. When I pulled it free, a small set of initials appeared on the corner tab. TV. Appraisal. My chest tightened. I didn't recall authorizing an appraisal, certainly not one labeled with Travis's name. Slipping on my reading glasses, I opened the folder slowly, as though it might bite. The document inside was dated 8 months ago. During that week I was down with the flu, when Delaney had offered to bring over soup and insisted I rest. Don't worry about anything. Page 1. Property summary. Page 2. Appraised value. $775,000. Notes in the margins. Potential for minor cosmetic upgrades. Kitchen reno could increase resale by plowed 10%. I flipped to the last page and stopped cold. The appraiser's remarks included a footnote. Client requested discretion due to owner's health condition. I ran a finger along the edge of the paper, the kind of crisp you don't get from age. This report wasn't archived, it was waiting. I had never seen it. I had never agreed to it. I closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan rotating above my desk. Each slow blade cut through the air like a clock hand, slicing time into thin, empty moments. Still holding the file, I glanced across the room to Travis's old laptop. He'd left it plugged in overnight, some half-hearted promise to show me how to back up the family videos. He'd said before dinner. I hadn't touched it then, but now, I opened the lid. The screen flickered to life without a password. A spreadsheet was open. Dad, finance breakdown, XLSX. There was a column for my utility bills, broken down by month. My grocery receipts had been averaged. My medical expenses were estimated based on national data. In one tab, a line read, Silver Oaks deposit, projected payment date, Nov 14. My breath caught. Another tab, liquidation timeline. Under that, stage home for showings, early October, list no later than Nov 1. My name wasn't mentioned once. I had become a column, a liability, an asset to be moved off a family ledger. A third tab chilled me more than the first two. School transition window, Micah, Jan semester. Ideal time to relocate, Dad, Q4. The cursor blinked like a metronome. Someone had clicked save at 2:41 p.m. yesterday. That was 15 minutes before I'd rung their doorbell with a bottle of wine in hand. I closed the laptop gently, too gently, moving to the printer. I hit print on every open tab. The pages slid out one at a time, each one feeling like a resignation letter I hadn't written. I gathered them into a stack, held them tight against my chest, and walked across the room to the cabinet where Ellen's will was kept, bottom drawer, right side. I tucked the papers next to her will, then locked the drawer, back at my desk. I sat for a long time. The sun had risen higher now, catching on the brass photo frame that held our wedding picture. Ellen's smile hadn't dulled. Her eyes still held that mischief, that strength. I stared at that photo as I whispered aloud. So, I'm a calculation now. There was no rage, only a firmness settling into my bones, like the way wood creaks before a storm. I didn't call Travis, didn't mention the spreadsheet. I closed the laptop and placed it carefully back on the dining table, exactly where he'd left it. Then I opened a notepad. At the top, I wrote, Things they forgot, I built. Underneath it, I listed this house, this porch, the school fundraiser I organized after Ellen passed, the scholarship fund I set up in Micah's name, the custom crib Travis never knew I stayed up nights to build. Not everything needed to be shouted, but everything needed to be remembered. The air in the garage always smelled like motor oil and memory. It was where I came to think, alone, with the smell of old wood and rusted tools as my only companions. Today, I came because the house felt like a stranger. After what I'd read on Travis's laptop, I needed space. Not distance, but quiet. The garage was dim, lit only by the dusty afternoon sun slanting through the side window. I walked past the workbench where Ellen used to lean while I fixed old lamps or sharpened her garden shears. That corner held a kind of peace I hadn't found since she passed. But then my eyes caught something unfamiliar, a stack of cardboard boxes taped shut, 4 of them, labeled neatly in black marker, Dad, storage. I hadn't packed these. I hadn't asked anyone to pack anything. I crouched beside the top box and slit the tape with my house key. Inside, the first thing I saw was our wedding album, leather-bound, its spine cracked with age. Beneath it lay a bundle of old birthday cards, my handwriting on every one, and Ellen's tea set, each porcelain cup wrapped in newspaper. The paper was dated just 3 days ago. At the bottom of the box, carefully folded, was the shawl Ellen wore on our last anniversary. Lavender wool, hand-knit by her sister. I remembered helping her drape it over her shoulders that night, the way she'd smiled despite the chemo fog. I touched it now and felt none of that warmth, only calculation, removal, as if someone had mistaken grief for garbage. I opened the second box. On top, the frame from our first family photo with Travis. Below it, a set of books I'd once read to Micah, his favorites, Where the Red Fern Grows and The Boxcar Children. More layers, Ellen's gardening gloves, my old baseball cap, the one she used to steal during summer barbecues. But what stopped me cold was the third box. It was labeled Garage Sale, not memories, not family heirlooms. Garage Sale. On top sat the ceramic vase Ellen had saved 3 months' worth of grocery coupons to buy. Her handwriting still faint on the underside. Spring '91, for our home. A yellow post-it was slapped on the side. Clutter, donate, or trash. I stood still for what felt like an hour. In my mind, I saw Ellen placing that vase on the dining table every Easter. I heard her laugh when she dropped in daffodils, still damp from our backyard. I remembered the day she brought it home, her eyes bright like a kid sneaking candy. And now it was clutter. I walked outside and leaned against the garage door, trying to breathe. The sky had clouded, and the wind picked up leaves around my ankles. Then, like an echo from another life, Micah's voice rose in my mind. "Grandpa, do you think we'll ever live here together someday?" He'd asked that just last week. We were in the kitchen, peeling apples for Ellen's old pie recipe. I'd smiled then and said, "Maybe one day, buddy." But now I saw the truth behind the question. They weren't dreaming of sharing the house. And they were rehearsing ownership. I stepped back inside and closed the garage door behind me. No slamming, no shouting. I went straight to the notepad on my desk, the one titled, "Things They Forgot I Built." Under the first 2 entries, I added a third, Ellen's vase, not for sale. And then a fourth, they're already packing me away. Sunday mornings used to be sacred, Ellen's blueberry muffins, the smell of percolating coffee, and the sound of the newspaper rustling in our shared quiet. Now, all I had was a lukewarm mug and the stale echo of those memories, sitting alone in a creaky lawn chair in the backyard. The sun filtered through the red maple Ellen planted, dappling the grass like broken glass. I scrolled through Facebook to pass the silence, thumb hovering with no particular intent. Then it stopped. A photo, recently tagged. It was Delaney. Their smiling faces filled the screen. Travis, Delaney, Micah, standing in a familiar room. But not any room. My living room. The same living room Ellen and I had painted 3 times in our marriage. The floral curtains she sewed herself hung in the background, faded but still soft-looking. The oak coffee table I built with dovetail joints sat front and center, its surface freshly polished. The caption read, "Our home. Finally, #new beginnings." No tags for me. No mention. No dad's place or visiting grandpa. Just finality. just possession. The comments were glowing. Congrats, Delaney. Such a cozy space. You two deserve it. Can't wait for the housewarming. I stared, not blinking. There were 22 likes. I recognized most of the names. People who'd shared holidays here, who'd eaten Ellen's pot roast, who'd held Micah when he was teething and cried through Ellen's memorial in this very room. None of them noticed I was missing from the narrative, or worse, none of them cared. I set my phone down slowly. The ceramic mug in my other hand trembled just enough to spill a dark ring on the armrest. I needed air. The sidewalk still had early spring grit along the edges, and the wind carried the promise of pollen and unfinished conversations. I turned right at the hedge and walked toward the older part of the neighborhood, where people still waved from porches. Mrs. Griggs was pruning her front roses in a wide-brimmed sun hat. "Well, look at you, out getting your steps in," she chirped. I offered a smile, too tight to feel. She leaned on her rake. "Your boy told me they'll be moving in by the end of the month. Said it was a good time with the market cooling off. Congratulations, Lowell," I blinked. The end of the month. I hadn't even been offered a box. "Thank you," I managed. She beamed and went back to her roses. I kept walking. Their future had already been posted, commented on, and validated by strangers and neighbors alike. A future where I was a memory. At best, a note in the will. And yet I was still breathing, still mowing the lawn, still paying the utilities and folding laundry in the same machines Ellen once used. When I got home, I walked straight to the mantel. Ellen's picture was there, framed in silver. A thin piece of blue stationery was still tucked into the corner. I hadn't touched it in years. Her handwriting, faint but intact. "You built this for her. Never let her forget that." I swallowed hard. She forgot. "Elle," I whispered. They all did. My hands didn't shake when I picked up the pen. The notepad sat open where I left it. Photo posted, house claimed. I'm still in it. Then I added, their version of our future has no space for me. Stepping into the workshop behind the house felt like entering a chapel of memories. Tools hung exactly where they belonged. Dust motes floating in shafts of morning light. The workbench showing the faint scars of past projects. It had been weeks since I'd been inside. Today, I meant to reclaim something. The scent of old cedar and machine oil welcomed me, and so did the empty drawer. I had stored there my files for Maple Ridge, the house expansion I'd drafted back in 2004. Now it was gone, just gone. No note, no explanation. The folder titled Maple Ridge, Original Drafts, was nowhere. Back in the kitchen, Micah climbed onto a stool at the counter, tablet in hand. "Grandpa, look," he said. I glanced over and froze. On the screen was a 3D rendering, smooth lines and shaded surfaces, a house design, a modern expansion. My expansion, the one I drafted after Ellen suggested adding a sunroom so I could build in peace. Dad said a firm might hire him if he pitched it, Micah explained, almost excited. It's got possibilities. My hands dropped to the counter. That design had been from me, from my mind and my hands, but the file displayed was signed Travis Lark. That realization pressed down on my chest. I went to the computer, accessed my old email folder that sat dormant since Ellen passed, and there it was, the original blueprint, saved in 2004. In the margins, Ellen's handwriting, notes about beam placement, flower bed orientation, and where light fell at dawn. It was personal, part of who we were. Then I opened our shared folder. Travis had uploaded something. His name was on the title line. No mention of me. Modified lines, cleaned up margins, polished layout. I clicked through more than once, each click feeling like betrayal. I drove back to my desk and opened the DAD Finance Breakdown XLSX spreadsheet from Chapter 2. There, tucked between sale projections and elder care estimates, was another tab. Potential IP leverage, Dad's designs. And beneath it, estimated firm buy-in if packaged with property. I stared at that line, as though it might dissolve. They weren't just planning to take my house, they were commodifying my creativity. I printed the blueprint. Each page felt heavier than the last. I circled Ellen's notes in red pen. Lines like, "North light perfect at 7 a.m." and "Prime window for reading" stood out raw. I laid each blueprint page beside the spreadsheet, creating an exhibit of ownership and violation. Then I added a phrase to my notepad. Even my walls weren't mine anymore. I let those words settle into the room. I didn't call Travis. I didn't confront him. Instead, I opened my file drawer, navigated to the folder labeled Countermeasures. There was no plan yet, just a placeholder. I jotted in the first line, "Find a real estate lawyer who remembers Ellen." That line, simple, precise, felt like buying myself time, or buying back truth. I returned the printed materials to their proper drawer, closed everything gently. Then I glanced at Ellen's picture on the mantel. In her eyes was resolute love. I whispered, "They took my design, but not my memory." And for the first time in days, I felt ready. The sound of splintering wood greeted me before I even reached the garage door. I stepped inside just as Travis hurled another chunk of lumber into the growing pile of scrap near the recycling bins. He didn't notice me at first, too focused, too quick with his hands, like he was trying to erase something. Then I saw it. The bench. Not just any bench. Our bench. The one Micah and I built together 2 summers ago. He'd been 9. All skinned knees and questions about screws versus nails. I taught him how to square corners, measure twice, cut once. We carved our initials into the drawer, MV plus LV. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Now it lay at Travis's feet like discarded plywood. "I'm getting rid of this junk," he muttered, catching my presence too late to pretend surprise. "We need space for storage." He grabbed one end of the bench and let it fall hard. One leg cracked audibly. The drawer slid open, goggles still inside, like the ghost of a summer afternoon staring back at us. I didn't speak, didn't flinch, just turned, jaw tight, and walked out. Later that evening, I found Micah hovering in the hallway, arms crossed awkwardly, eyes shifting like he'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in his head. He crept into my room, clutching the edge of my dresser like it might hold him up. "They said you'll be gone soon," he whispered. "But you're not sick, Grandpa? Why do they talk like that?" I put down my book. The hurt in his voice was small, but sharp. I didn't lie. "I don't know why they say those things," I said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere right now. That's the truth." His shoulders eased slightly. "Did they say where I'd go?" Micah nodded. "A place where people babysit old folks. But you're not a baby." I almost laughed. Almost. But it caught in my throat like a sliver of glass. "Thank you," I said, brushing his hair back. "That means more than you know." After he fell asleep, curled beneath the Star Wars blanket I bought him last Christmas, I sat back down at my desk. The list stared back at me. The one titled, "Things They Forgot I Built." I flipped to a fresh page. "Micah knows," I wrote. "They don't care if he hears. They've normalized my exit." Then, "The bench. Broken. But I'm not." The words carved themselves into the page. I pressed harder than I needed to. I opened the drawer labeled, "Ellen, Legal." Inside was her old recipe binder, a worn notebook of bills, and tucked behind a folder, a business card. Jerome Hensley, real estate attorney. I dialed, let it ring once, then hung up. I didn't know if I was ready. But something inside me had started to stir, low and steady, like pressure beneath bedrock. I glanced at the photo of Ellen on the wall, her smile soft but knowing. Under the frame was a note she left on our 35th anniversary. "Don't let them forget to be grateful." "They've forgotten," I whispered. I looked back at the card. I haven't. The walls in this house weren't made for secrets. They echoed softly, like an old man's cough slipping through the floorboards. That morning, From the top of the stairs, I heard their voices carry from the kitchen. I didn't move, just listened. Delaney's voice was calm, crisp. "Your dad is our Project 98. High cost, high risk, low return." Then a chuckle. "Travis's. Don't say that where he can hear you," he muttered. Micah's footsteps creaked somewhere above, still in pajamas, probably searching for his socks. They spoke openly, confident in my absence, or perhaps just no longer concerned with my presence. Project 98. That's what I'd become. Not a father, not a man, a file in their spreadsheet of inconvenience. I remained at the top of the stairs for a long moment, one hand tightening around the railing. The grain beneath my fingers was one I sanded and stained myself. My house, my stairs. And yet, with every word I'd just heard, it felt like I was being unbuilt from within. I walked down slowly, expression smooth, practiced. In the kitchen, they straightened. Delaney offered a too-sweet smile. Travis poured another cup of coffee and said nothing. Outside, a car door shut. I turned toward the sound. A sleek gray SUV had pulled into the drive. From it stepped a woman in a navy blazer, clipboard in hand. She didn't knock. She rang the bell with the familiarity of someone arriving for a showing. Delaney rushed ahead of me, smoothing her shirt. She opened the door. "Hi, you're early." The woman smiled professionally. "Sorry, traffic was lighter than expected. I'm from Birchstone Realty, just here to take a quick look before the listing meeting." Before Delaney could usher her in, I stepped behind her. "You're early," I said flatly. The agent blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were the caretaker." Delaney's smile froze. "This is Lowell," she stammered. "My father-in-law." I stepped aside. "Please," I said. "Come in." The agent walked through the foyer, commenting on the woodwork, the open space, the natural light potential. She tapped the walls with her knuckles, as though she was already imagining where to put someone else's couch. Delaney stayed close to her, nodding and chiming in. "We've kept it well maintained. He's always kept it tidy." I didn't respond. We passed through the living room. The beams above us, hand-hewn by me, framed the space she now described as modern rustic. I became invisible in my own home. Until the agent asked, "And just to confirm, who's listed on the title?" Delaney opened her mouth, then stalled. I answered. "Me?" I said, calm as still water. "Since 1999. The agent turned, eyebrows raised. "Oh," she said, "then I'll need to speak with you separately about disclosures." Delaney flushed. "Actually, this isn't the best time. Can we reschedule?" The agent hesitated, then nodded, offering a firm handshake to me before leaving. I walked her to the door in silence. When it clicked shut behind her, the house felt cavernous. Travis had vanished into another room. Delaney muttered something about errands and disappeared, leaving only the distant hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I walked to the bay window, the one Ellen used to sit beside while sipping tea and watching birds, pulled out my notepad, called a project. Mistaken for a stranger. Then, beneath the final line of notes, I drew a red slash, thick, slanted, the red line, and beneath it, in deliberate script, "Time to move." The morning air felt colder than it should have for late October. Maybe it was the light, sharp and too honest through the blinds, or maybe it was something deeper, something internal, unspoken. I found myself at Ellen's dresser again, the one we kept untouched since the day she left. The drawer slid open with a familiar whisper, softer than I remembered. Silk scarves, old perfume bottles, a faded prayer card, and beneath them, a small black device, a voice recorder, dusty but intact, a piece of masking tape curled on its surface, for when you need to remember. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressed play. There was a pause, then her voice, clear and tired and entirely Ellen. "If they ever treat you like a problem," she began, "don't let them solve you. Take the power back." "You built it all." My breath caught. I know they love you, Lowell, but love can change after grief. It can become something else, something like burden, or guilt, or calculation. I've seen it happen. If they start to speak over you instead of with you, promise me you'll remember who you are." The message ended there. No goodbye, no signature, just silence. But I could still hear her. I stared at the device in my hand for a long time. Then I picked up the business card from my desk. Jerome Hensley, real estate attorney. I'd almost called him once already. This time, I didn't hesitate. He answered on the second ring. "Jerome Hensley, this is Lowell Wexler," I said. "You handled my wife Ellen's estate. I think it's time we spoke." "Of course," he replied, and I heard something in his voice. Recognition, maybe even respect. "Come in this morning if you can." The law office hadn't changed, still smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Jerome stood when I entered. Gray suit, careful eyes. "I remember Ellen well," he said. "She was very specific about keeping your name on everything. She didn't want the house or your assets tangled in anyone else's hands." He pulled up the deed records. The title was clean. My name, and only my name, was listed. No power of attorney assigned. No legal maneuvers done behind my back, yet. "We can initiate protections," Jerome said, tapping a document. "We'll solidify your control, prevent unauthorized sale or transfer. We can also prepare for future actions, if needed." "What kind of actions?" I asked. He slid 2 forms forward. "Preemptive transfer restrictions, privacy clauses, sale freezes that require your direct signature, regardless of family claims." I nodded. He handed me a pen. "If you want this done before they come back from their trip," he said, "we can make it happen." I signed. Twice. Back home, I sat in my study as the sky darkened behind the bay window. My notepad waited. I added 2 more lines. "Ellen knew. She warned me." Then, "It's not revenge, it's repair." The office was quiet, clinical. A small clock ticked above the notary's desk, its hands moving like they knew this moment had been waiting too long. I sat across from her, pen in hand, eyes scanning the final page. "This is your last signature, Mr. Wexler," she said gently. I didn't nod, just signed. No witnesses, no family, no champagne toast or parting handshake. Just ink and truth and a quiet that didn't ask for permission. "Would you like me to notify the buyers?" the notary asked. "No," I said. "They'll find out when they try the key." Outside, the sky was thick with low-hanging clouds. Back at the house, I moved with deliberate care. I didn't pack furniture. I didn't touch the art on the walls or the dining table I'd built with Ellen. Those things belonged to the stories they'd chosen to forget. Instead, I packed what mattered. Ellen's voice recorder, our wedding photo, the legal documents Jerome had given me, and a small stack of Micah's drawings, one of the house with stars above it, another of us building the birdhouse 2 summers ago. Each item slid into the suitcase like a bead on a rosary. Memory, pain, dignity. As dusk settled in, a locksmith's van pulled into the drive. He was young, polite, didn't ask why the job was urgent. By the time the new locks clicked into place, the sun had disappeared behind the maple tree. I paid in cash, tipped too much, closed the door behind him, and locked it myself, decisively. Then I went to the table, a sheet of paper, no larger than a grocery list, waited. I took my time with the pen. "If you're reading this," I wrote, "it means you're no longer entitled to silence." The letter didn't rage, it didn't curse, it didn't plead. It listed facts, what I had seen, what I had heard, what they had assumed, their meetings, their spreadsheet, their plans, their dismissal of a life lived in these walls. "This house was never yours," I wrote. "You inherited my care, not my property, and you failed." I taped it on the inside of the front door, at eye level, just where Travis liked to hang coats. Then I climbed the stairs to Micah's room. Quiet as breath. On his nightstand, I placed a sealed envelope with his name written in block letters. Inside was a simple map, hand-drawn, with arrows pointing to the attic crawl space, the hidden storage under the stairs, the loose floorboard in the study, and below that, I wrote, "You knew where the truth lived. Thank you for never walking past it." I stood in his doorway a moment longer than I meant to. Then I turned off the hall light. At 11:58, I zipped my suitcase and carried it to the truck. No hesitation, no farewell. I turned off every light in the house, paused once by the bay window Ellen loved, then closed the door behind me, and drove into the quiet, not lost, just done. They arrived at 9:43 a.m. sharp, Travis, Delaney, and Micah, fresh off their trip, rolling luggage up the path as if the house were still theirs. From my small apartment 2 miles away, I watched it unfold on the live feed. The mini camera, tucked behind the porch light, offered a perfect view of the front door. Travis reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his old house key, and slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, tilted, pushed harder. Click, nothing. Delaney crossed her arms. Try the back. Micah stood quietly behind them, hands tucked in the sleeves of his sweatshirt. I sipped my coffee, elbows resting on the table, back on screen. Travis disappeared around the side yard. Delaney hesitated, then noticed the folded sheet of paper taped just inside the glass pane. She opened the storm door and peeled it off. I leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the first few lines. Her mouth opened slightly. Travis returned, breath short. Delaney handed him the paper without a word. He read silently at first, then out loud, voice rising with every sentence. "He sold it? Without telling us?" Delaney's face twisted. "He can't do that, can he?" Travis froze. He never gave me power of attorney," he admitted. Lower now. You thought you had time to lock it down legally," she snapped. They began to argue, their voices colliding like glass thrown at stone. Micah stepped back from the porch. "I asked him," he said softly, almost to himself. "I asked Grandpa if he still owned the house. He said yes. You said he was just confused." Travis turned. "Micah? No," the boy said. "You said he forgot stuff." But he didn't. He walked past them, down the walkway, and sat alone at the curb, head bowed but dry-eyed. On my screen, Delaney reached for him. He flinched. In the silence that followed, I opened my file drawer. Inside was a revoked version of Ellen's original trust, the one where she had briefly listed Travis as co-beneficiary of the property. The trust had been nullified legally a year before she passed, citing incompatibility of intent. I reread the document. Incompatibility of intent. I folded the paper, placed it in a new folder labeled "What They Thought They Had." Back on the screen, the camera caught Travis storming toward the car, slamming the driver's side door so hard it bounced once before closing. Delaney yelled something off-screen, too distorted to catch. Micah stayed on the curb, unmoving. I reached for the remote and powered down the feed. The screen blinked black. In the silence that followed, I whispered to the empty room. They finally heard the echo. By Sunday morning, I no longer needed to check the camera. I knew what I'd see. Travis pacing, Delaney whispering furiously, Micah watching from the staircase. Quieter than usual. The house wasn't mine anymore. And that was the point. I'd left more than furniture behind. I'd left them a mirror. Whether they looked or not was on them. I imagined the scramble. Travis trying to spin a version of events that made him sound wise. Delaney calling someone in real estate to confirm legality. I imagined Micah refusing to answer questions, just as I had once refused to answer Ellen when she asked if I'd write a will early. Some silences aren't avoidance. They're warnings. That morning, I didn't dress like a man in retreat. I shaved, buttoned my only pressed shirt, packed one manila envelope labeled in bold ink, for transparency. I placed inside a scanned copy of the property deed history, clean under my name since 1999. The revoked trust Ellen had quietly amended before her diagnosis, removing Travis as co-beneficiary. Printouts of Travis's spreadsheet, complete with liquidation timeline, IP leverage, and relocation cost. And finally, the full transcript of Ellen's voice recording. If they ever treat you like a problem, don't let them solve you. This wasn't vengeance. This was a preemptive strike against the revisionist version of my life they might try to tell. I took the envelope and walked 2 blocks to the public library. Stillness hung in the air, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. In the far corner near the windows, I logged into one of the old computers. The keyboard stuck slightly on the R, but I typed slowly. I opened a secure encryption platform and scheduled an email to be sent in 10 days. The recipient, Rachel Dupree, investigative reporter for the Missoula Tribune. She'd written a 3-part series last year on elder exploitation through forced estate transitions. Her inbox wouldn't ignore this. In the body of the email, I wrote only one thing. If no one hears my voice, let the paper speak. I didn't vanish. I withdrew. Then I scheduled it, clicked, confirm, closed the tab. As I exited the library, the morning sun sliced through the clouds. I didn't feel defiant. I felt correct, like a loose brick finally seated into place. Outside the coffee shop, I spotted Mrs. Griggs arranging potted mums on the patio table. She waved as I passed. "Everyone's talking," she said. "Your son looked like a kicked can yesterday. What did you do?" I smiled. "I suppose he expected my door to stay open forever." She laughed. Big, toothy, not kind but not cruel either. "They always do, then get mad when it closes." I tipped my cap and walked on. Back in my new apartment, the walls were thin, but no voices came through. I erased every voicemail off my phone, reset it, then took out the prepaid device I bought 3 days ago and activated the new number. I opened a drawer, placed the old phone inside, and shut it without sentiment. On the fridge, I taped a yellow post-it, just above the grocery list I still hadn't filled. It read, "No need to answer what doesn't call anymore." The house was small, the bed low, the view modest, but my choices were my own again, and that was more than I'd had in years. The apartment was dark when I opened my eyes. Not from fear, not from a nightmare, just restlessness. It was Sunday evening, but it could have been any night these past few weeks. Time had become quiet, like the rhythm of a distant train, always moving, rarely heard unless you chose to listen. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood floor creaked under my feet. Every item in this apartment had a place. My shoes lined by the door, a folded blanket on the chair, Ellen's picture frame on the shelf across from me, gently tilted where the afternoon sun would catch it. I walked over, lifted it. "I did it," I said softly. No audience, no echo, but I knew she heard. Back at my desk, I pulled out the thickest envelope I owned. It wasn't for Travis, it was for Micah. I began writing. I told him about the blueprints, the spreadsheet, the empty words said behind my back. I told him about the things that mattered more, how Ellen always left a light on when I worked late, how we once gave up a vacation to pay for the roof because we wanted the house to feel safe. I didn't talk about the betrayal like a man who lost something. I spoke like someone who found clarity. I ended the letter with words I hoped he'd hold on to long after I'm gone. You'll be told what legacy means, that it's property, money, heirlooms. But the real legacy, Micah, is how we choose to carry each other forward or forget. I folded it carefully, clipped it to a typed op-ed draft I'd written days earlier. Together, they formed something more than paper. On the envelope, I wrote, "Editorial submission for print consideration." Then I stepped outside. The night was cool, forgiving. Street lamps buzzed above me. I walked 3 blocks to the local newspaper office. where an old blue drop box sat beneath the awning. I slid the envelope inside. Didn't hesitate. Didn't look back. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 8:12 a.m. I ignored it. At 8:47, a neighbor from my old street called. I let it ring. At 9:15, I opened the online edition of the Missoula Tribune. There it was. What happens when we erase our elders, a house I built, a son I lost. My name below the title, no pseudonym, no dramatics, just the story. Laid bare. It spread faster than I expected. Older readers flooded the comment sections, some angry, some sorrowful, many saying, "This is my story, too." People shared the article with captions like, "Never let this happen to your parents." The fallout came within hours. Travis and Delaney's names became recognizable, but not for the reasons they'd hoped. Neighbors turned cold. Their employers started asking questions. Micah was taken in by Delaney's sister for a while. I hadn't asked for that, but it gave him space. Back in my apartment, I sat with a mug of coffee and Ellen's handwriting beside me, a birthday card she once left under my pillow. "You are never too old to start over," I smiled. She always knew how to say, just enough. That afternoon, I stepped onto my tiny balcony. The seedling Mrs. Griggs gave me had finally taken to the soil. I watered it gently, careful not to oversaturate. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh, not of grief, but of release. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a knock on the door, or a voicemail laced with guilt, or someone needing just one more signature. I wasn't waiting at all. I'd left the battlefield, and I hadn't lost. I watched the sun move through the clouds and whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the part of me that had waited longest to speak. I didn't win by shouting louder. I won by refusing to disappear.